This is a dodge roll. Like every other thing from Dark Souls and Elden Ring, it's completely overtaken the gaming industry, for better and for worse, in my opinion. So you ever get a bad case of deja vu when you're playing a game? Like something feels awfully familiar but you can't quite put your finger on it? Well, there's one thing that I know I can, and it's happening right here with the dodge roll, a mechanic that was popularized with the Souls games and is basically here to stay for eternity. This mechanic was first seen in the Soulsborne series with the very first entry, Demon's Souls. But like with everything else about this series, you might as well look to its successor, Dark Souls, which put the success in successor. With its crushing difficulty, incredible world design, and brilliant approach to combat and enemy encounters, focused primarily on tough-as-nails bosses that require precise timing and patience. The dodge roll is one of, if not the most important abilities you have at your disposal, letting you avoid basically any attack, regardless of the attack's animation and appearance, so long as you time it correctly. This continues with the latest and most successful release for Soulsborne games, Elden Ring. You can jump headfirst into a giant flamethrower or death laser so long as you dodge at the right time, since the beginning of the dodge roll animation provides you with invincibility frames. What's invincibility frames? Well, for those of you who may not be clued in, it's a window of time where you're invulnerable to damage, measured by the amount of frames of game time that are dedicated to the effect. For example, if a game's running at 60 frames a second and your dodge has 30 frames of invincibility but 45 total frames of animation, that means you can't take damage for half of a second after you perform that dodge. After that, you have to wait a quarter of a second for the animation to finish, since you're now vulnerable to being hurt. After 15 frames or another quarter of a second, you're free to move again. Most games will use invincibility frames to give the player a moment to recover after taking a hit, but in the case of From Software, this is the cornerstone to evasive maneuvering in Dark Souls, Elden Ring, all of them. And boy do I have a spicy hot take, I am f***ing tired of it. This thought crossed my mind the other week when Ritzler, indie developer of 3D platformer Pseudo Regalia, posted this tweet asking about what the next trend for combat would be in video games following the formula that From Software has laid forth with Dark Souls. I know Demon's Souls did it first, but for the sake of the argument, I'll just mostly mention Dark Souls since that was the one that popularized Souls games as a trend. Anyways, this tweet got me thinking a bit about how trends form and what'll come next. I chimed in saying that I think the next progression of combat would follow something like the recent God of War games, which takes a slower, more crunchy, combo-based approach to Dark Souls, though less combo-focused than something like a traditional action hack and slash, like the older God of War games or Devil May Cry. No big reason behind that choice, it just felt like it since there's not that many games taking this approach, and I think the success and popularity for the new God of War games will start trickling down into other franchises. But that's not the most important bit. I also mentioned that I wanted dodge rolls to die off since they seem to infect so many games. Ritzler mentioned Kingdom Hearts 2, which is probably one of the earliest cases of using dodge rolls in a 3D action game to avoid attacks. Kingdom Hearts has an entirely different approach to combat, so it's interesting to see the similarity that Kingdom Hearts and Dark Souls share. I've only played Kingdom Hearts 1 myself, so I can't comment very much on this, but I don't think it's a conspiracy theory to say that the resurgence and addition of dodge rolls in so many modern games is thanks to the success of Dark Souls. Back in my day, where I barely had object permanence, I think one of the first examples of combat in a 3D third-person action game was maybe Ocarina of Time. It revolutionized so much for 3D action games, and I think was the first use of a targeting lock-on system that's still a mainstay in action games today. Talk about innovation. No dodge rolls to be found though. The closest thing you had was a neat backflip encircling your enemies. Honestly, it still gets the job done. This works pretty great. I'd say that the new Zelda games and their approach to evading attacks is actually super similar to Ocarina of Time, but we'll get back to those later. Flash forward about 10 years after Ocarina of Time and we get Dark Souls, but actually we have more than just that too. You have more loose examples like in Horizon Zero Dawn and Hogwarts Legacy, which are quick little maneuvers to give the player an extra tool for evading rather than just running around. Actually though, I would say that those more closely resemble the dodge maneuver you can perform in Uncharted 2, which predates Dark Souls. It's not really useful in that game and much more of a flashy little move to quickly get out of the way. And I think it behaves similarly in Horizon and Hogwarts Legacy. Just a flashy little evasion. It reminds me most of the rolling from 3D Zelda games before Breath of the Wild, like Wind Waker, Twilight Princess, and so on. I mean, even Pokémon, a series which is kind of joked on for never evolving, included a dodge roll in what's arguably its most innovative game in probably the series' entire history. If dodge rolls can infect Pokemon too, then no game is safe. Meanwhile, there's games that more closely follow the idea with Dark Souls and its dodge roll mechanics, like God of War, utilizing a dodge roll as a catch-all method of avoiding attacks. There's a shield and counter in that game too, but like in Dark Souls, the dodge roll is your safest option. I'm noticing this more and more in games, and I'm getting pretty sick of it. Remember Batman Arkham Asylum? The game that makes you feel like Batman? That game's combat is probably still one of my favorites made in the last 15 years. So why does it feel like everyone's just casually moved on from it? It ruled. I love it. I love the free flow manner, taking down enemies and using a single button to counter attacks. It just feels good, but it never devolves to being so simple that you can just turn your brain off. It also demanded proper skill and attention towards the later parts of the game, and its sequels when introducing new enemy types that demanded use of your gadgets and other abilities. Enemies would come to you flooding in and you'd stand there like an unstoppable bat-shaped wall, just taking them down one guy at a time. It almost reminds me of a rhythm game with the emphasis on timing and flow. I'm shocked that we've moved away from this combat system, since combat in other action games don't really compare to me. The Souls game and Elden Ring also have parries to counter attacks, but the timing for them is so difficult, and the risk in combat for these games is already so high that and I think most other players, just opt to rely on dodging and timing attacks instead. It's why you rarely see playthroughs of Souls games where players have a shield, because as far as I'm aware, that's the only means of performing counters. Bloodborne's a bit different with the gun, and Sekiro is its own beast entirely, and it's sweet. I haven't played it myself, but from what I've seen and heard from my Dark Souls obsessed brother, I love the direction it went with its combat. Games like Spider-Man never feel quite right with me, because the combat never clicks with me like the Arkham games did. Its combat is much more about evading enemy attacks and flying to them, rather than letting them come to you and countering properly. This is much more of a me problem though, and not a fault on Spider-Man. My buddy played Spider-Man before playing the Arkham games, and he has the reverse problem. Spider-Man's combat feels natural to him, whereas Arkham's combat felt alien. I wonder if different games could take a different approach to help feel diverse and unique without seemingly changing all that much. Final Fantasy XVI has a similar dodge mechanic to Dark Souls, except instead of having invincibility frames for your animation with a roll, it's a quick sidestep that creates a slow-mo type effect when you dodge with correct timing, giving you the chance for a snappy counterattack. The dodges look differently for Dark Souls and Final Fantasy XVI, but they effectively accomplish the same thing. They're your primary means of avoiding damage, and can avoid all damage when timed successfully. But the differences in animation, speed, and the slow motion effect for Final Fantasy XVI help give the maneuver an identity of its own. I wouldn't say I want evasive mechanics to die off in games, but rather see them take on a different approach to how they work. In Spider-Man, you get a similar thing with Final Fantasy XVI. Dodging at the last second lets Spider-Man do a quick automatic web shoot counterattack. In Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, the dodging is actually mapped to the same button as jumping, similar to Ocarina of Time. However, with over 20 years of technology and innovation, we invented slow motion in games. The newer Zelda games provide a slow motion rush attack for the player to counter their enemies when they dodge an attack at the proper moment. While all three of these games more or less have the same mechanic for avoiding attacks, they all have enough minor differences to make them feel unique. These little changes go a long way to adding a lot of flavor for me. One of my personal favorite mechanics for countering enemies in games is from Metal Gear Rising, a slick parry that you perform by simply holding in the direction of the enemy and pressing the attack button at the same time they attack. It sounds awkward to have the attack button be the same as the parry button, but it works great and provides a nice ebb and flow in combat, really letting the player take back control of the flow of combat for that brief moment. On a traditional gamepad, since your thumb is already on the attack button, there's less of that awkward moment where you have to switch back and forth between dodging and attacking. You can focus with just the same button, making it feel very natural. You can purchase a dodge in the game, but it's pretty worthless. Your primary means of fighting back isn't to run away, it's to face all attacks head on, which is a philosophy that can be found in the whole game. It couldn't be more in your face with that opening boss fight. You know the one. Try doing that in Elden Ring. Final Fantasy XVI also has a similar mechanic, though with that game the parry doesn't feel as satisfying to me as a well-timed dodge, so I prefer evading. Most of the parries I achieve are usually by accident, and then I just panic and waste a good chance for damage. I also gotta mention games where your primary means of evading attacks are also your means of traversal through the game. What do I mean by this? I mean the dashing from Returnal, and the flash shift in Metroid Dread. With Returnal, your dash for traversing the levels is your best means of defense against the bullet hell enemies. Run and dash through their attacks with slick precision. The feedback is great, the animation is bright, and you always know exactly how far you're gonna go with the dash. I love it. It's snappy and quick, the exact feeling you want from a game like this. I love it even more with the flash shift in Metroid Dread, a quick side-to-side dash that's not only used to explore the world, but it creates for some of the best boss fights in a 2D game I've played. They're lightning fast, enemies are relentless and hunt you down, and the flash shift can be used 3 times in a row for flying a long distance or doing some slick back and forth dodging. You feel invincible when you use this ability, and the snappiness of it is addicting. I'm also left thinking about Fury, similar to Returnal with its reliance on a quick dash to avoid all the bullet hell attacks. Evasion and combat in video games can be incredibly diverse, so it can feel disappointing to me when I see games start adopting similar tactics, or just flat out copying the dodge roll from the Souls games without applying their own twists and personality to the mechanic. This is a difficult idea to get right though. I'm not expecting developers to reinvent combat in 3D games, or even try new ideas. I just like to see more of some of the old ideas get thrown into the mix alongside Dark Souls dodge rolls, Batman Arkham style counters, Metroid style dashes, Metal Gear Rising parries. I think there's a lot of variety that could be had. And hey, even if you want to include the dodge roll, does it have to be a roll every time? I mean, like every single time? I've seen all the Harry Potter movies, and I don't remember Daniel Radcliffe sidestepping and rolling on the ground to fight Voldemort. So is it really appropriate for Hogwarts Legacy? Do you know how often people dodge roll to avoid attacks and fights? I mean, I don't know. I'm not like out here in the streets filming impromptu street fights, but I just think there's gotta be something else here, man. The dodge roll needs to die, but not really. Just take a step back. Let the other guys breathe for a bit. No need for Dark Souls and Elden Ring to dominate the industry forever. If every game had invincibility framed dodge rolls and lacked different means of invasion and defense like counters and dashes, we wouldn't have moments like these anymore.